Hi, everyone. We are going to let our participants file into our Zoom room here and get started in just a minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. First, I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us here today. This is our fourth in our four-part series of webinars looking at drones for workplace safety. And I'm really excited to be talking about submersible drones today because I think they are just really cool use of drones. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Emily Whitcomb, and I'm the director of the Work to Zero initiative here at the National Safety Council. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about the initiative in just a minute, but want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Univar Solutions for their sponsorship on this webinar series. And Tracy, I'll hand it over to you to say a few words.
Thanks, Emily, and good morning and afternoon to everyone on the call. My name is Tracy Rogers. I'm the Director of Health and Safety for Univar Solutions, and I'd like to start off by saying how honored we are to be sponsoring today's webinar, a deeper dive into reducing risk by submersible drones. Univar Solutions is a place where people matter, and our first value is the fact that we're always serious about safety. This is the value is strengthened even more by our long-standing relationship with NSC and the guidance that they provide in keeping all of our employees safe. So once again, thank you to NSC for allowing us the opportunity to sponsor and introduce this very valuable seminar. And now back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Tracy, and thank you to Univar Solutions again for sponsoring this webinar series. If anybody on the call today is interested in sponsorship opportunities, we have posted a link for you in the chat to check out. So let me tell you a little bit about Work to Zero if you're not familiar. We are a grant-funded initiative here at the National Safety Council. We are funded by the McElhatton Foundation and focused on helping employers adopt life-saving technology. So we are working hard to create tools and resources for you all to really help make innovation more accessible for employers. So I wanted to share some of the resources that we have available. If you visit our website, nsc.org/work-to-zero, we have about 40 pages of content looking at hazardous situations, safety technologies, and then we have a tools and resources tab that has all of our reports that we've released, our Safety Technology 2020. Those look at our top hazardous situations and tech solutions. We also have 4 deep dives on our priority technology. And then we have about 5, the drones will be our 6th recorded webinar series. So we've looked at COVID and technology, immersive technology, fatigue, proximity sensors, and now drones. So if you haven't had a chance to check out any of those series, those are all free, recorded on the website. And then if you're looking for a searchable catalog of technology solutions, check out Safety Tech AI, a really cool website. We have a partnership with DuPont Sustainable Solutions to bring that resource to you all. At the end of this hour, I'm actually going to give you a sneak peek into our newest resources that we're going to be releasing in just about 2 weeks at our NSC Congress and Expo. And those resources are on digital readiness. So I will talk to you about digital readiness, give you all the opportunity to do a little self-assessment, and then you'll have to come back to the website in 2 weeks to check out those resources. So as I mentioned, Congress is coming up. We have a safety technology pavilion on the expo floor. And within that, we have a Work to Zero booth. We would love if you're going to be at Congress, come check out our booth. You can talk to the team and check out our new digital readiness resources. We also have 3 tech sessions at Congress, so make sure those are on your agenda. And then our Work to Zero Summit and Expo is right around the corner. February 17th through the 18th. We're going to be in Louisville this year. We are going to do a little bit of a hybrid format to bring the technical sessions to those who are not able to travel or for whatever reason. So make sure you save those dates for our summit. We're really excited about that. So as I mentioned, this is our fourth in our series on drones. All of these have been recorded. I believe they are up on the website, or we are hopefully having all of them up at the end of this week. So if you missed any of them, go back and check those out, or send them to colleagues that you think might be interested in learning more about drones. So why are we interested in drones? I know this is not a picture of a submersible drone, but I want to make the point that everything we do with Work to Zero, we start with what is the hazard we're trying to reduce. And that's really why our initial research looked at the top 18 hazardous situations. And within that research, we identified working at heights, we identified confined space entry, underwater tasks as all being very hazardous situations that drones are able to help mitigate. So that is why we found drones to be one of our priority technologies to talk about and the focus of our webinar series. So if you have not read that report of the 18 hazardous situations and relevant technology, we released that in early 2020. It is available on our website, nsc.org/work to zero, and it is under the resources tab. So make sure you check that out. To introduce our panelists today, we have Antonia Lucky with Nutrien, and she spoke about her drone use in the past. So excited to have you back, Antonia. You always have a great story for us. And then Cody Warner with Deep Tracker, but I'm going to give them the opportunity to say a few words about themselves and their work in this area. So Antonia, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I will just basically say thanks, Emily, for having Nutrien again at the NSC webinar here. And of course, as you know, we were saying, it's all about eliminating the potential hazards and putting people out of the line of fire and making sure everybody goes home safe every day. So I'm happy to be here to share, and I'll pass it across to Cody.
Yes, thanks from our side too. Appreciate NSC and Emily for having me and having Deep Tracker on. My role with the company, I'm the global sales manager, and I've been with the company now for 7 years. And the thing about selling robots is that it's less boardrooms, more out in the field and actually performing inspections for people. So I think that's why I'm on here, is that I can offer a perspective of the actual in-field applications, not just the products themselves.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to have both of you on today and learn more about your drones. So we want to make sure that we have our audience engaged today. So I would love it if you all could navigate to your chat. If you could flip the to all panelists and attendees, and go ahead and introduce yourself, your name, what company you're with. We'd love to hear your interest in technology. Are you already using drones? Are you looking at adopting a drone program? We'd love to know any barriers you're trying to overcome. And then how can Work to Zero support you? Our job is to make resources for you all. So it's really helpful for us to know what would be helpful for you. So go ahead and take the opportunity to introduce yourself in the chat. And then we're going to have some time for Q&A today after our moderated discussion. So there is a Q&A tab on your Zoom options, and pop in any questions that you might have for our speakers today. And you will be able to upvote questions. So if you see a question that somebody else asked that you really like, make sure you upvote it. I try to start with the most popular questions first. So I already see people introducing themselves in the chat. Thank you so much. It's always nice to know who's joining us, and it helps us kind of tailor the discussion to our audience. So I'm going to kick us into our first question here. And I would love if the panelists could just take some time to talk to us about how they've used submersible drones. What were you trying to solve for? What was the experience like? And Antonia, I'm going to have you start. I know you have some stuff to show us, so you are welcome to take over the screen share and show off your content.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Are you seeing the slide deck clear?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. And as I mentioned, I'm in coveralls today, but that's all part of making sure we're out there and as leaders doing what we can. And it was nice to see in the chat persons putting their designations because we have the right team at this webinar here to speak to you. And in getting into our underwater drone inspection program, it really started with understanding that not all drones are up in the air. Some of them do quite the opposite, which is they dive deep for us to show us what's there where we don't have to put people in the line of fire. And how we started at the Trinidad Nutrient site, because we manufacture ammonia and urea, is we basically had a team come together, engineering, maintenance, operations, and safety, health, environment. And why we came together is because we realized that we had divers, people going down to inspect our seawater makeup pumps, our firewater pumps out at the port. And sometimes when they have to do this every 6 months, we'd have delays with bad weather. We would have where the divers are in turbidity with, fast flowing waters at the time in the ocean. Sometimes they'd be down there and we worry about the fatigue, the clarity of the water with the divers seeing. We challenged ourselves. How can we make this more safe? Getting the job done without putting people in the line of fire. And so we went the way of a deep tracker underwater drone. And I know Cody's there to speak about the drone, but we looked at the value we would get. Overriding all of this is the value of safety and getting people home safe every day. But more so, what we would spend on the drone and the value of the money we would get out of putting down the drone, and if something happened to it, was minimal to the loss of life. You have to look at the value input. And when we put that drone into the water, we got more than we bargained for in a positive way. And so I would get straight into it with looking at what was our situation. As I said, we had these pumps. We would have to inspect them for silt buildup, for biological buildup of crustaceans, and even for damage. We'd have to clean it. And what we realized was every 6 months, putting people down there, as I said, with bad weather, because we have the hurricane season in the Caribbean here, detection sometimes would take long, it would be unpredictable, and we needed to find a safer, better way to put people out of the line of fire and to get this job done safely. So we went with an underwater drone to do the inspections. And when you look at this here, the high cost and the potential for serious injury or fatality risks basically had to be avoided. So as I shared a little bit just now, there was the need for a rescue plan. You needed several divers. There were delays if a ship from another company was coming into the port area, we would have to stand down the diving activity to do these inspections. Then you had the whole aspect of looking to see if the pumps, suction, we didn't want people getting sucked in. There was that fear factor. So what we thought of is, what could replace a diver? And the underwater drone can do everything and more the divers could have done. So the drone would be in-house because we purchased one. It could be put down anytime. We didn't have to wait for 6 months. We could put it down into the water. We would get clarity. It could manage with the turbidity because of the propeller system and the dynamics of this deep tracker underwater drone. It was user-friendly. We had pilots trained, less manpower, equipment, logistics was needed versus the divers. And of course, the cost of the underwater drone was minimal. We didn't have to worry about the weather. We didn't have to worry about any delays, and it got the job done because whatever we were seeing down there, the whole team could have seen it up on the port safely and make informed decisions based on what we saw, whether we even needed to clean the pumps or what was the status of the pumps. So of course, I just want to end with this basically before I get into the Q&A later on, but this is a new technology. This is something that brings to the table where you could improve and make tasks safer. This is engaging talent with the technology that's out there and eliminating the potential for serious injury and fatalities. It's a much safer method of underwater inspection. It removes the needs to have the divers down there. And of course, you can use it for cooling tower basins like we do, for the demon tanks to go in and see the condition of the tanks and the integrity. And of course, what we use it for, the port facilities. These are some images taken, as you could see there. The clarity is very clear, no pun intended, and we could see that the job gets done safely and we send home people safe every day. Back to you, Emily.
Thank you, Antonia. That was super helpful to understand how you all have been using it. So Cody, I'm going to hand it over to you to share your case study. As I pull up, I have a video to share while you are speaking. Are we good?
Yeah, that's great.
All right,
Yeah,
take it away.
The video you're going to show here is going over and just showing some pretty shots of all of our different vehicles. But one thing I do want to ask Antonia, because she already did such a great job selling our drones, is do you see the uses typically being ones that you would have planned to use for divers before? Or do you find that now that you have something, you're going out and doing inspections just because you have something now, like you didn't think about it when you were originally making your business case?
And Cody, that is so correct, because as I said, we use it now in our cooling towers, in the demon basins, and you don't, like I said, you don't wait for these 6 months. We can just go in as often as we want. It gave us that, as we would say, confidence that this technology exists. It can be used any and everywhere where a submersible can go, and it gives us the information far better than we thought we could get with just 2 eyes.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, so realistically, the goal of any robot going anywhere, any drone going anywhere, is to keep the man out of the situation. And just like with Nutrien, we've seen it used in a wide variety of different scenarios. It's not typically just the application you have in mind originally. And I wanted to give a few customer examples and then a few application examples to go through. And then later, where we're going to talk about more specific measurables that go along with it. But a few customers that are using it in the industrial sector, we've got petrochemical companies like Dow or BASF. We've got other industrial companies like Chiquita, actually. So your bananas, they're using it for the port infrastructure type inspections. We see utilities. I saw someone here is responsible for power line inspections, which is typically thought of as just an aerial drone inspection. But your power line sometimes will run over rivers, will run over lakes, and there's piling structures that will be holding up those power lines. So having a tool to go and verify those structures, that's another example of an application that you could use an ROV potentially for. We see it could be nuclear power plants, so actually within highly radioactive environments, cooling tanks, any sort of external structures to the plant, some things like culverts, for example. So sometimes you have a fully submerged culvert. It's not easy to drain a culvert, but you want to be able to go and get a look. Is there a blockage or something simple, or is there some sort of major defect, or just a general condition assessment? You can use an ROV or our pipe crawlers for that, for instance. We see coal, fossil fuels, hydro, all of those types of energy production all have water retaining assets, so cooling towers, or water running through, so an intake structure. On a hydro dam, for example, you've got your intake gate, and you want to make sure it's not corroded, that the bolts are in good condition. You want to make sure it's not blocked. You want to make sure that the trash rack isn't full of stuff like logs, or we've heard stories of cars even. You want to go and look and start to evaluate and come up with a plan of how am I going to clear this. For smaller things, we even have tools, little grabber claws, that you can go and make some small recoveries. You're not going to pull up a car with your ROV, but you certainly can go and drag a line down and bring down lift bags. We've seen things done like that for ATVs and snowmobiles and other similar size objects. So really creative ways you can use the ROVs. This picture right here is actually Exelon ClearSight. They're using our Revolution ROV for a cooling tower inspection at a coal power plant. We see it used for offshore, whether it's oil or wind, or for ship hull inspections. We see municipal water. I think I saw a couple people from the water side of things. So that could be clean water. It could be your water treatment plant. You've got plenty of different structures that need inspections where you're either draining. So you could drain a tank and then you're waiting multiple days for the tank to drain, and then you're sending a confined space specialist in. or you're sending divers in and there's only one way in, one way out. It's not a safe environment at all. Forget that diving is risky. It's confined space combined with diving, so extremely risky. Examples of customers would be cities like Atlanta, DC Water, Chicago, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, LA, San Diego, Santa Clara, all the way down to small towns. So I'll talk about a little later, is a town called Renfrew. They only have 9,000 people. So it's not just big companies, it's not just big cities that can benefit from this technology. It's really anyone with a water retaining asset that you want to have eyes on, not only for cost savings, not only for safety, but also for convenience sake, being able to go and pull something out at any point to go and get eyes on that structure.
Thank you, Cody. Super helpful, and love the video as well. I know our audience always likes seeing the drones in use. Just for our participants, a reminder, if you want to pop any questions in that Q&A, we will get to those in just a minute. And also, if you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself, it's always nice to know who we're speaking with. So the next question, I would just love if you could elaborate on some of the benefits that you've seen using these drones, especially if there's been any measurable impacts. And Antonia, I'm going to have you kick this one off.
Sure. Thanks, Emily. And of course, I see that in the chat as well with the Q&A. That's kind of like along the same question. Somebody's asking this, so I'll try and answer it one time. Could I go ahead and do that? Because they're like, can you estimate how much you've reduced high-risk activity by utilizing the technology, maybe in hours? So of course, there's several advantages as we shared. I'll answer the question with the hours first. And sometimes when we have to put divers in the water, remember, you're looking at the safety aspect now is taken away of them having to be in water, people in the water. You have the drone in there, it could easily be retrieved. And you're looking at a job that would have taken persons several hours because you have to bring them out for fatigue. A drone doesn't get fatigue, thankfully. It's running on power. But each time you have to take those divers out with a structured pause, if there's a ship coming in, we were looking at sometimes 3 days of diving activity and 8 hours of diving broken up by an hour a break, an hour a break. Everything done with the drone was done in 6 hours in one day. So right away, you see the difference with the safety element goes without saying, but more so 6 hours. And as I said, the thrusters that are on the deep tracker that we have allows and caters for turbidity in the water or rough seas. So before a diver would have to come out because of the rough water and, you know, he could be bouncing around there like a little buoy in the water. The deep tracker is so advanced that when it's in the water, even in turbidity, it sits still and you get the images where there's no disturbance because of what's happening in the water or the condition of the water. And Emily, to your point now, what you were asking, it's you look at, again, you always in safety, health and environment, you look at the factor of life and the factor of the cost of making sure that life goes home safe every day. And looking at preventative maintenance, what we had to do, we looked at the fact that it can be done safer. The technology in 2019, when we bought ours, to 2021 exists where it's even far more advanced now. And you look at no personnel needed, no hiccups with the process. It was worth the product that we went with. So definitely you look at the advantages of the underwater drone outweighing the risks involved in the jobs that had to be done.
Thank you, Antonia. Cody, do you want to speak to this one?
Yeah, I'll just throw out a few numbers here that we've heard from our customers. So one example was Thomas Greiner. He is a maintenance supervisor from an Exelon plant in Illinois, and it's the Braidwood nuclear plant. And he estimates, so they saved about $10 million when they added up the costs of every time they had to wait for an outage to do the inspection. So they had to wait for a very specific window of time that they could perform these traveling screen inspections. And if anything happened where something went wrong with the dive team, not necessarily something catastrophic, it could have just been that, you know, they weren't able to have enough bottom time to get the job done to be able to perform the inspection they wanted. They would have to pull the divers out and wait for the next outage, which could be months. So they estimated about $10 million and they spent about $60,000 on their drone. So it's an exponential amount of savings that they've had. The other example I wanted to bring up was to not only focus on large utilities, is that Renfrew, that example I talked about earlier with 9,000 people. They spent $40,000 on a pipe crawler, and they were able to eliminate $350,000 a year in inspection costs just by having their own equipment. And it's also created this other little bit of a benefit that we don't necessarily think about with drones. And this is really the case with aerial drones as well, is that it's kind of it's a cool job. People like to operate this equipment, and it's a way to attract talent. I know that attracting new talent can be quite difficult for some organizations. So being able to have a tool that's in some cases just fun to use is actually a great option as well. So they found that with Renfrew, is that one example is it's a small northern Canadian town that they actually have a little rig set up with it where it's on an ATV, a four-wheeler. And so whoever gets to ride it that day, it's like something that they're really excited to go and do. And it's helped a little bit in that attracting talent side of things.
Thank you, Cody. Yeah, that's a great addition that I hadn't even thought about, as far as it just being a fun job, right, to operate a drone. So we always like to ask our panelists about any best practices. You all have been using these types of drones for quite some time. What have you learned? What are some lessons that you could share with some of our participants that are on the line that might be interested in getting started? And Antonia, I'll have you start this one as well.
Okay, sure. So of course, and I saw again in the chat, somebody asked that, is it like the pilot operator training requirements, the same for underwater versus air? And yes, it is. You have to have trained pilots to be able to maneuver, to use, to handle the underwater drone. And of course, best practice, I would have to say, it just looks to get rid of that line of fire potential of having persons in the water. And Cody spoke to it as well. You look at the time divers have to be in there. The opportunities that you have with the drones are so much better now, where the drones could go in at any time. Sometimes divers are not available. Sometimes, as we said, the conditions of the water are not available for them to go in. Drone eliminates all of that using an underwater drone. With challenges, of course, you would want to always have, and we picked that up in first instance, more people trained to be pilots, because in the initial phase, we just had 2 persons. And then we realized these 2 persons are from maintenance and reliability, which handles the port and the underwater pumps. But then when we went to the cooling towers, it was operations personnel now. And we realized they would need, that type of hands-on, because they understand the cooling tower from an operations perspective versus a maintenance and reliability persons doing the drone operations piloting. So it's always good to make sure you have a cross-functional team basically doing the training for that pilot, for sure, getting that pilot practice. I would say that's a challenge. Make sure you have a lot of persons, because what they're doing, what they're seeing, and where they have to go with that underwater drone could now be diverse, and you'd want diverse persons being trained.
Thank you, Antonia. And I'm just a little curious, how long have you been using these underwater drones, and how many do you have in your fleet?
I like that term, fleet. So we started using it in 2019. In fact, it won a Best Safety Award in Nutrien for the use of technology on this drone. So we won out of all the Nutrien sites. The Trinidad site won for the implementation of this technology underwater drone. So 2019, we started using it. We use it all the time now. And we've even ventured now into aerial drones, robotic crawlers as well. And we have one that we use, that we have owned, one in our fleet, but we are purchasing 2 more in 2022.
Very cool. Thank you for adding that. And if anyone wants to hear about Nutrien's use of aerial drones, Corey Wald spoke on last week's webinar about that. So go check that one out. But Cody, I'm going to hand it over to you and see if you have any best practices or challenges or just words of advice for those in the audience.
Yeah, and I think one important distinction about the difference between aerial and underwater is that there aren't FAA type regulations or requirements. It isn't quite as regulated from the standpoint of I need a specific license to operate it. It's more about just having the time and experience with the ROV. And there's kind of two main parts of operating, and this goes for aerial drones too, is one is how do I actually maneuver the vehicle? How do I control this device? And then the other is what am I looking at? What's the goal of the mission? So it's really, I think it's important that you have someone that is well versed in the operation of the vehicle, and then they always are supported with someone who has a good understanding, like Antonio said. So operation side or maintenance side, who has the best understanding of the structure that they're looking at and can support them. Maybe that person is, maybe that those two people are the same person and the operator can know all the structures. It all depends on how your organization is run, but it's really important that you break those two parts out, because you can be an excellent ROV pilot, but I don't know whether I'm looking for corrosion, what type of corrosion is considered okay. I don't know, is that marine growth, or those mussels being there, or those barnacles, is that normal? Is that fine? Or is that really bad? Do we have to get cleaning done right away? So knowing those types of things is less of a, come get training from Deep Trekker. It's more of a, you need an organizational specific program in place. And that's going to change from organization to organization. But the other side of it too that I like to mention is that something that maybe doesn't get thought of right away is the data management side of things. So it's great that you go and perform these inspections. Now you've got the trained people, you're going and doing it, and maybe you only need the live feedback. Maybe that particular mission was, hey, I just wanted to see if the propeller was stuck or not, or something like very simple. But sometimes what you're wanting to do is be able to have historical data to revisit, and you want to have it really thorough. So go in with a plan and give your pilots a template to work from. It can be really simple, a one-pager Microsoft Word type document, but something where they have a very structured, this is what I need to fill out that day. Maybe it's, what were the weather conditions that day? Maybe it's what's the sediment level in the tank, right? How am I going to figure that out? Give people a very specific set of instructions on this is what I'm going to do. And then it makes future inspections of that same structure really well organized, and you can see historical changes really easily, and it doesn't cost you anything extra to be able to have that kind of data managed. So that's the other thing I'd say to keep a lookout. And one thing I want to point out is how you can go about finding something like the depth. You can get creative with these tools. So you can get really fancy acoustic sensors and map out a whole tank structure, make a 3D model. Or you can get a grabber and hold a ruler and put your ruler into the sediment. Or, you can use your depth sensor on it and be able to tell, how much water is above me. I know this tank is 10 meters, 30 feet high, but the sediment is at 25 feet. Then you have an understanding of what's the rough estimate of that tank. So yeah, don't go into shopping for a submersible drone, much like with an aerial drone. You don't necessarily need every tool in the toolbox. You can use it in a creative way to achieve the end goal.
Thank you, Cody. And actually, you started talking about regulations, and that was going to be one of my questions because I was just genuinely curious. Is it regulated by the Coast Guard, or could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So there's no specific regulation on where to operate it. Technically, at this moment, you can go take an underwater drone, unless if it's in a secure location that has its own regulation for that specific geography. You can go into any waterway and go and use an underwater drone. And I wouldn't be overly concerned with the security risk in most cases. So, but the thing about that is regulated is, depending on the industry, is what is the structure that I'm looking at and what's the inspection I'm performing. So an example for shipping, for example, is every year there's an annual survey done on a ship called a UWILD, it's an underwater in lieu of dry docking survey. And there's certain regulations on how to perform that inspection to a certain standard that's acceptable by the classification society, who determine if that ship can be insured or not. So it's less about the actual, how do I pilot it? It's more about what am I looking at?
Yeah, interesting. And Antonia, I'm wondering from your perspective, are you under any regulations in Trinidad?
So I was actually smiling because when Cody said, you know, you don't have, yes, we do, because we're in the Caribbean, so not like North American, we do have some security issues. So our Coast Guard, our Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, actually has to be alerted whenever we are putting the drone down into the water. And also the nearby companies, because remember, the port is there, but they are the users. So for, as they would call it, trade secrets. You don't want to be knowing that a drone is taking footage of whatever's down there. So we do have to actually have security clearance from the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard before we deploy our drone into the water, and the user owner of the port itself. We have to make them aware of our activity.
I'm curious, is it just for your particular port, or is that a Trinidad-wide law?
This is just under the ISPS, port users for security.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
for security purposes, because
Got it.
all the petrochemical industries are located where we are, and they use that port for ammonia, for
Okay.
methanol, for urea shipping, import, export.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, thank you for expanding on that. So we do have a few questions in the chat. We have about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So if there's any other questions from our audience, feel free to pop that in. The first one up here, Antonia, you tagged it a little bit, but I want to ask it again and see if there's anything to add here. But are the pilot or operator training requirements the same for underwater versus air? And I would just love to know, where does somebody go to get training in this area? Who wants to kick this one off?
I'm going to let Cody go first, as he's the manufacturer owner.
Yeah. So kind of like I said, there's the two areas that you want to get trained in, and certainly as the manufacturer, we're not going to pretend that we know your structures better than you do. But we provide a virtual training series just to get your basic operating skills up to snuff. We can do in-person training as well. Our resellers will do in-person training. We find that the best pilot training, not structural inspection training, is practice, is just getting with low expectations on your first few inspections. Go and use it, and don't expect that it's going to be perfect right away. And you'll find that you'll just naturally build the piloting skills. The risk level of an underwater drone, outside of in pump situations where you can get sucked in, the risk level is pretty low in operating an underwater drone in comparison to an aerial drone. If you crash, the ROV is going to be fine. So that's why it's safer to say an informal safety practice. There are a few organizations that are getting more and more involved with how do I do the structural inspection side of things. I know, for example, the classification societies are starting to get more and more involved with how to perform hull inspections of ships. I'm not aware of how Nutrien does it, so I'm curious how, Antonia, how your pilots are getting trained.
Yep, sure. So with regards to our pilots, we actually had the virtual training as well as the practical training as well from Deep Trekker. And I mean, even I was watching on, and I felt like I could do it because it was so user friendly. But of course, these were the persons designated from maintenance and reliability and as well from operations. SHE was just there to oversee everything. So, you know, the training was very easy. I found it much easier than what I've seen the training for the aerial drones, you know, because you have that wind factor, you have that airspace. It was easier with the underwater submersible drone training. And just to jump in also with the fact that the training, when you get it, it's like a lifetime. It's like riding the bike. These guys, like I said, we encourage them to use it, but if you just ask them now to explain the training, they were able to do it just face to face, like a trainee trainer. So it's that really, you know, easy, and the requirements, as Cody said, less than the aerial drone.
Thank you. We have a question here about any use cases for law enforcement. Cody, I'm going to throw this to you. Have you heard of any?
That's a huge industry for us. I didn't think that there'd be anyone from that side of things, but yeah, so mostly for drowning victim search and recovery. So if you have a drowning, you're not going to use the ROV necessarily to save lives, unfortunately, but you can go and find a lost soul with the ROV. What typically the way that process works in the past before underwater drones is that you'd send a boat out with what's called a side scan sonar. It's painting a picture of the sea floor, and then you're picking up targets that could be the victim. And then they throw markers in, and then they send dive teams to each of those markers. And the way that the ROV helps is that it's much faster to deploy. It's much safer to be able to go and figure out, are those targets rocks, or are they victim, or are they evidence? So if someone threw a firearm overboard, for example, that's another thing that you might search for.
Thank you. I didn't even think about that use case in law enforcement. That makes complete sense, and I'm sure is a really good tool to have in their arsenal. The next question I'm going to go to here is about where's the best place to start? And I know we gave our employers some advice on that, but this one particularly is interested in the cost options for this. For those that are beginners, are there lower cost options to get them started, or is that not a good route to go? Or Cody, if you want to take this one, go for it.
Yeah, it all comes down to the application. If I am staying in relatively shallow water, I'm staying in calmer waters, then a really basic option from us is, $6,000 to get in, and you can upgrade that over time. So there's certainly accessible options. If I know right away that I'm going to be, in the North Sea, for example, which is very rarely ever calm, and I'm going and doing offshore oil platform inspections or offshore wind type inspections, then yeah, you can certainly try with a basic option, but you're probably going to find that you'll be out of your element pretty quickly. So it really comes down more to the application than what the price you're paying.
That makes sense. Thank you, Cody. And then the last question I'm going to take here before we talk about digital readiness is Antonia, I'm going to throw this to you. What about evidence collection underwater? Could you speak to that?
Yes, so I'm wondering if the evidence is the legal or illegal, like the law enforcement part. But for us, for example, we had cases where contractors, they were working over water and they basically dropped tools. So I'm starting with the simplest thing. They dropped tools, expensive tools into the water. Oh, we don't know where the tool is. And we're like, oh, we're going to send down our drone. Let's see if it's right where you were working. Evidence now for inspections. And Cody spoke to it. One of the key things about having these drones, especially the underwater drone, is having data. And he spoke to where you could teach the pilots, how to collect the data, how to retrieve data, because in the future, you want to be able to show that, look, we have evidence that there was no corrosion. There was evidence of no, integrity compromise on equipment when you did your checks with the drone. So doing more frequent checks helps us with the frequent checks being done to have evidence to pick up anything that could start going on toward before a 6-month window, what we used to have in the past for maintenance. So evidence of any corrosion, evidence of any crustacean buildup, especially with the pumps in the cooling towers. If you see any structural cracks or integrity issues, you have that as evidence to show, look, this is something that was not, we didn't pick it up before. It has to be spontaneous or because of an earthquake. It actually helped you have data to work with to show your maintenance program was in check. You were checking things and you were having evidence with the data, with the pictures, with the video streams of what the drones can take. And more so, you can show that you were doing everything possible with the drones to clean, to keep things free, safe, and of course, to make sure if anything happens, you could check back your records if you picked up anything.
Yeah, thank you, Antonia. And Cody, I was wondering if you could speak to that from a law enforcement use case perspective.
Yeah, first I'll mention that sometimes people are putting different sensors as well, not just for visual inspections, but as they're collecting evidence on anything, if they're collecting any sort of inspection evidence, then they can use tools like sonars for measuring. They can use thickness gauges to tell, if you wanted to say, hey, there's no corrosion, I could actually have a UT sensor that I placed in that exact spot, and I know what the thickness was at that point, and now I know the thickness at this new point. You now have this historical difference. You can now tell change over time. You can also put things like a grabber, so that tool case, we dropped tool overboard. Well, maybe you can actually go grab it and bring it up with the drone. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use it. one story I wanted to add to this too was that there's a company called C-SPAN on the west coast of Canada, and they were doing logging. So they have logging ships that come in and they load the logs onto the ship with a crane and they drop it over. And what happened was they were suspecting that the loading was missing the target, that they were actually throwing logs overboard. So they actually bought a ROV for the original case of counting how many logs actually made it onto the ship, so then they can verify how much are they actually delivering. And it was a way of collecting evidence for their case that the loaders weren't doing their job, or were. So there's that side of things. And then on the evidence recovery side, it's the same as looking for a drowning victim, just the target is different. So if I'm looking for a gun, for example, then that's the target I'm looking for. It's the exact same process of how to find it. And you're going to go with the side scan, you're going to try and find a little metal object, and you're going to go verify whether it's a rock or whether it's a gun. And the great thing about the ROV is that not only can I send the ROV down to go look for it, I can also use the grabber to bring it up. And in cases where it's drugs, if you have a bag of drugs that's thrown overboard, it's actually considered a hazmat situation. So you need a now specialized dive team to go and do the search and recovery. And with the ROV, again, it's not going to be any different to the ROV being near the drugs, so it's able to go and do that search as well. So from an evidence for law enforcement standpoint, the ROV is a great tool to have.
Very interesting, thank you. And we did get one more question in the chat. And this is in regards, what's involved in sterilizing the drone to do drinking water tank inspection? So I'm not sure who wants to take this one.
Antonia, do you guys do sanitization of it, or are you not going into drinking water or anything?
We don't go into the drinking water. It's just the cooling towers into the ocean and into the demon tanks.
Yeah, so from a standpoint of sanitizing, typically you're doing that for drinking water applications, and you can actually dunk it in a full chlorine bath if you want. If you want to have a big tub of 200 part per million type chlorine solution, you can do that. Most people opt for just spraying it, but it's a very similar process to if you send a diver in. So the nice part, and this is back to the safety aspect, is that divers have a lot of crevices. Their wetsuit has a lot of different areas where you could have bacteria in it. The ROV is quite small. There's not really anywhere that bacteria is going to be hiding if you give it that chlorine bath. So it's another risk. You're taking away the risk of contamination by switching diver out for ROV.
Thank you. We had some great questions from our participants. And thank you to Antonia and Cody for sharing your expertise and your stories with us today. I've been promising our audience throughout our series that I was going to share our digital readiness resources with you all and give you kind of a sneak peek about what that's going to look like. But before I do that, I just want to start with, why we thought it was important. And one thing that we've been hearing over and over again from our employers and on all the webinar series that we've done is that adopting technology programs is not as easy as going out and buying a drone, right? There's other things that you need to do within your organization to get yourself ready. So that is why we really focused on this concept of digital readiness. We at Work to Zero really see digital technologies as being the future. And the future is here for many organizations, such as Nutrien. And it's really on the horizon for other organizations. So we're really trying to make innovation more accessible for our employers. So to talk about digital readiness, I want to just define digital technologies for you all, at least how we're using that term. So for us, digital technologies include any electronic tools, systems, or devices that generate, store, or process data. And digital technologies really are transforming how we protect our workers, how we minimize loss, and how we increase profitability. But to really yield the true potential, organizations need to be very intentional in their investments to equip and align their mindsets, their skill sets, and their tool sets. And that's pretty much what our digital readiness white paper is going to be about, how you can do that with your organization. We actually partnered with Decker on this, and this paper was developed by our research manager, Dr. Lori Guasta, along with Decra's Dr. Mei-Li Lin, so they can take all the credit for this fantastic resource for you all. So I want to show you the 5 phases of digital readiness as we've defined them. I'm going to walk through each of the phases with you all, and I'd love if our audience could kind of self-assess where they see their organization in these phases. And if you're comfortable, share it in the chat. I just love to know where you all fall in here. And then when our white paper is released in 2 weeks, it'll give you more information on how you can move your organization through the different phases. So as I mentioned, we have 5 phases to digital readiness. In the earliest phase, which is the observing phase, the organization is unsure about the value of innovating and is passively exploring how digital technologies can be used for safety. There's likely a lack of digital skill set across the organization, and perhaps an overall lack of trust may be present among the leaders. So in this phase, we'd really like to see organizations collecting feedback from really everybody in the organization that might touch any type of digital project, and start really collecting information about possible digital solutions and the business value for it. In the experimenting phase, our second phase here, proof of concept activities may be taking place. They're usually in conjunction with specific projects related to digital application. And most people in the organizations are probably technology bystanders at this point. And the speed of the innovation might rely heavily on a single person or an individual project outcome. So to move on from the experimenting phase, identify a digital champion who can really assist in the change management and establish a roadmap that assesses the company's mindset, skill sets, and tool sets, and what's needed for innovation. In the third phase, which is the adopting phase, investments are likely being made in developing and acquiring the skill sets and relevant technologies. There's a well-defined purpose for technology, and safety is communicated. And most people in the organization accept and support the use of safety technologies for innovation and benefit. In this adopting phase, the organization applies change management principles to nurture and maintain the positive mindset of the affected groups. So some best practices in that adopting phase: ensuring digital safety activities are operating as intended and are really integrated seamlessly in all affected organizational processes. And then continue to collect feedback from your decision makers, your end users, and really any affected groups. In the integrating phase, an alignment of digital mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets exists, and most in the organization are actively involved in digital safety activities. There is a clear appreciation of the benefits of safety technology, both to the organization as well as the individual. Change management principles are used to manage any new vulnerabilities or risks, and the organization actively seeks out technologies and talents to maximize the value of safety. So some key points here in our integrating phase: evaluating the integrity of data and digital outputs to ensure alignment with current and or future organizational value regarding safety as well as business goals. And then consider the opportunity to incorporate digital solutions and innovation in all aspects of organizational capabilities and vision. And then in our fifth and final stage here is transforming. Mature organizations incorporate a digital vision set to establish future safety strategies and drive new safety innovation. The digital value for safety and business is constantly and intentionally leveraged. to manage the company's risk profile and to expand the scale and scope of worker engagement and protection. So once in the transforming phase, it's really important to employ continuous improvement principles just to make sure that there is alignment, as well as nurture the digital vision and integration across the company by committing the necessary resources for maintenance and growth and innovation. So those are our 5 phases of digital readiness. And I also want to share with you where to get started. So maybe you're at the very beginning of this journey, and what can you do to advance forward? So they put together 4 best practices: align, assess, identify, and clarify. So align with the business value and articulate the why the new technology is needed. Assess how the technology interacts with and impacts the various users and groups throughout its life cycle. So in our white paper, we talk a lot about a human-centered approach, and that's really engaging those end users, engaging everybody who might be involved in this technology, and make sure that they are engaged and they're empowered in the process. Identify what supporting elements are needed. Maybe you need to engage with IT, with HR, with legal. Think about all the necessary functions that need to be involved. And then clarify expectations. Anticipate that there will likely be errors in the change management process, and assess any possible unintended consequences before you get started. So that is an overview of our digital readiness resources. You will find that at nsc.org/digital readiness in about 2 weeks. So we're going to be releasing that at our NSC Congress and Expo. So it will be a white paper as well as a survey, a self-assessment for you to understand what phase your organization is in. And then referencing back to the white paper can help get a better understanding of how to move through those 5 phases. So make sure you jot that URL down and come back in just a couple weeks. So as I close us out here, I want to give a big thank you to Univar Solutions for sponsoring this drone webinar series. If you missed any of the webinars in the series, they are recorded. They should be available up on our website at this time, or they will hopefully be by the end of the week. So go check those out. And I just want to give a big thank you to our audience today and our panelists. Antonia and Cody, really appreciate your time and expertise sharing with us today. We had great engagement in the chat and in the Q&A. So hopefully our participants were able to get the information they were looking for. And with that, I will just remind you all that you will receive an evaluation survey at the end of the webinar. We'd love your feedback. We want to design these webinars to be fulfilling for you all. So let us know what we did well and what we could do better so we can refine and make future webinars the best that they can be. So thank you all for joining us today. And I'm going to sign us off here and say have a happy rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, take care, everybody. Be safe.
All right, thanks, everyone.